I'm Jeremy Wade, freshwater detective and angling explorer. And the place that holds endless mystery for me is the Amazon. Now I'm heading back again on the mission of a lifetime. Over the course of a whole year, I'll go further and deeper into more remote and unknown river monsters territory than ever before. It was hailed as the safest boat on the river. But when the Sobral Santos sank in the deepest part of the Amazon, hundreds went down with it, in a catastrophe that dwarfs all my other investigations. Many passengers mysteriously disappeared without trace.
At the very least, we're talking about 50 people, at the most as many as 300.
The Amazon is the hunting ground for a terrifying lineup.
Half of it's been taken.
Of the world's most ferocious river monsters.
Hit my arm.
One way or another, I have to uncover what was behind the Amazon apocalypse. The Amazon rainforest covers tropical South America in a cloak of vegetation so immense it would smother more than 2/3 of the mainland US. And the scale of the mighty river that cuts through its heart is so vast it's almost impossible to comprehend.
To put it in some kind of perspective, the amount of water flowing through the Amazon is greater than the flow of the Ganges, Congo, Yangtze, Mississippi and Nile combined.
These tropical waters are so prolific that the concentration of fish species is 10,000 times that of the ocean. These include some very real river monsters.
When you think of all the aquatic predators patrolling these watery highways, it makes navigating these rivers a bit like driving a convertible through a lion enclosure.
And if there's one sure way the people living along its endless shores come into contact with the Amazon's river monsters, it's when a boat goes down. I learned Portuguese when I first came to the Amazon 20 years ago. It's an invaluable skill that's opened many doors for me.
Just talking to the captain about how potentially dangerous it must be navigating these waters with all the traffic on them, particularly at night, and he said, yeah, absolutely. And accidents do happen. In fact, one of the crew members on this boat was involved in the salvage of a really horrendous accident that happened.
It was a passenger and cargo boat called the Sobral Santos.
And apparently, even though it happened quite a while ago, the memory of that event still haunts people to this day.
Our boat mechanic, Manel, was only 21 when he was sent to a remote Brazilian town to help recover the wreck.
It went down in a place called Óbidos, which is the deepest and narrowest part of the main Amazon River.
Manel was accompanying a team of divers on a massive barge fitted with a crane, which took 5 days to get to Óbidos. He was assisting one of the divers. And what he said was that when the boat was raised, there were lots of bodies inside. And because those bodies had been there so long, there wasn't an awful lot left of them. Lots of them had all their flesh missing. He said the one thing that remained untouched generally was the hands, but everything else eaten away. There was huge loss of life. No one agrees on how many people were travelling on the boat that night. Perhaps 430, maybe as many as 630, yet only around 180 survived. The report from the official investigation has been lost, so nobody knows for sure what happened to all the passengers.
Some were retrieved dead from the wreckage, others drowned, and their bodies were recovered in the following days when they floated to the surface as a result of natural decomposition. But something doesn't add up. When you take into account the number of people travelling on the boat, there were still some passengers unaccounted for. At the very least, we're talking about 50 people. At the most, it could be as many as 300.
Manel told me the boat didn't go down in the middle of the river. It was docked in a harbour. I think something happened under cover of darkness that stopped surviving passengers making it to dry land. If this is the work of a river monster, then this catastrophe has a greater death toll than all my other investigations combined. I've got to find out the truth about what happened to the passengers of the Sobral Santos. The boat made a regular journey, carrying passengers and cargo from the port of Santarém to the city of Manaus, 450 miles upstream. It was when it stopped to pick up passengers at the small port of Óbidos in the middle of the night that disaster struck.
This is the place. This is where the Sobral Santos went down.
But will anyone really remember what happened here more than 30 years ago? And could whatever was lurking in the water then still be around now? There's only one way to find out. I've got to get a line in the water. But with so many large boats coming and going, fishing is prohibited from the working dock. Instead, I'm taking a position on the shore, next to the dock warehouse where the bodies recovered from the river were stored. Just as every journey begins with a small step, every mystery begins with a small clue.
You've got to start by getting something that the predators are likely to feed on. So I'm actually fishing for small fish at the moment. I've just got some light line just to see if I can pick up something probably just a few inches long is what I'm after. If I can get some fish like that, I'm then in a position to really go for what I'm really after. A good bait fish, though.
It's a Tetragonopterus, sometimes collected for aquaria, but the perfect size for me.
It's the kind of fish that could bring in larger predators.
If I get a few more to use as bait, I'll be ready to move up to bigger gear. But it seems I've got some competition.
Whatever that was, it's taken the hook, it's actually bitten the line.
In these waters, even the small fish are formidable predators.
That's something. This is actually a bit of a turn up for the books. Even right off the dock, we've got piranhas. Even on a fish this small, those teeth are still pretty vicious.
So could this be my first suspect? Contrary to popular belief, red-belly piranhas are mainly scavengers and only attack humans in exceptional circumstances.
That was actually quite a surprise to catch a piranha here. It's a fish that is normally found in the lakes rather than the main current of the river. But the fact that they're here next to the port doesn't necessarily implicate them in what happened after the boat accident. They're a side feeder. They're more active during the day. The boat accident happened 3:30 in the morning.
Is it possible all the noise and movement could have awakened them and triggered an attack? It would take a huge number of piranhas to dismember so many bodies.
Piranhas normally are found in actually fairly small groups. They're not in groups of hundreds, they're in groups of maybe 30, something like that. So although they're here, I don't think they were a significant factor at all in what might have happened to the people.
Still, the lethal weaponry deployed by even small fish here indicates how unforgiving life beneath the surface is. Although the disaster happened more than 30 years ago, I'm hoping someone in the town will have some details.
Bom dia. Eu ouvi falar de barco que afundou no...
E as pessoas gritando, entendeu? Muitas pessoas Tipo assim.
That's interesting. Stories of screams coming out of the dark, people getting eaten alive by something in the water. Even though this is something that happened a long time ago, it's clearly still very much alive in the minds of people here.
But I still haven't spoken to an actual eyewitness until I tracked down the former harbour master who was on duty that night. The first thing that Manuel de Souza says is that in the early 1980s, Óbidos had very little electric lighting and none in the port.
The accident happened at 3:30 in the morning, so it's dark. The boat had to do a bit of a turn as it came in close because there's an eddy close to the banks.
The deep, swirling water means mooring at these docks is always fraught with danger.
So it's manoeuvring so that it's coming against the current alongside the pontoon. As it drew alongside, it tied up.
He tells me that as a crowd of passengers moved to one side to get off, the boat began to lean heavily.
Then the next thing that happened was it drifted away a bit and the cables broke.
And in an instant, hundreds of people were plunged into the deadly waters of the Amazon. And the carnage that followed has seen no equal. I'm investigating the Amazon's worst riverboat disaster. In the deepest part of the river, I've learned that over the following days, fish consumed the passengers who died on board.
Lots of them had all their flesh missing.
And also that immediately after the accident, many passengers struggling on the surface suddenly disappeared, just yards from the dock. Some say they were eaten alive. The harbour master was right on the dockside, but with no lighting, the disaster zone was pitch black.
It was really too dark to see what was happening. But in the town at that time, there was a diver who worked with a gold mining team.
The diver volunteered to go down and help with the rescue.
He went in and he came up a very short time later and said, there's something very large down there. And when the people asked him, well, how do you know that? It's impossible to see. He said, just by the movement, there's something moving down there. And apparently he refused. He said, that's it, I'm just not getting into the water again.
So no one dared to approach the sunken boat on the night it went down. Daybreak revealed an apocalyptic scene. The river was awash with half-eaten bodies and body parts. Was some kind of river monster to blame? The Amazon is not lacking in suspects. With more than 3,000 species of fish alone, my challenge is immense. Made all the harder because the waters here at Óbidos are exceptionally deep and turbulent.
This outcrop of rock is the significant feature here. This is the reason the river is so narrow here. You can actually see the far bank quite clearly, whereas in a lot of other places in the main river it's just this thin grey line in the distance. But because it's so narrow, the river being squeezed into such a small gap, it's also very deep. We've got 200 feet beneath us, and also the current is very, very strong.
These unique conditions create a dangerous swirling eddy right in front of the dock where the Sobral Santos moored up. Because of the strong current, fishermen can't set static nets, but fish them on the drift. And it's no place for a rod and line. A bait cast from the bank would never hold position, and nor would an anchor. I'd risk being dragged into the path of oncoming boats. But I do have another option. Many fish patrol and even seasonally migrate up and down the Amazon. So if this part of the main river is unfishable, I may find what I'm after in the tributaries.
Oh, took on the way down. That's a piranha.
There are too many similar-looking piranha species to be sure of its identity. But there's one thing I do know. If they're out in numbers, then things might get difficult. And from the telltale tapping on the line, it doesn't feel good. It's another piranha. Small groups of these sight hunters couldn't account for a massacre in the middle of the night, but they would have been quick to come in and scavenge the next day.
The thing about piranhas is they very often get to the bait before anything else, so they actually prevent you from finding out what else is down there.
Changing location is the only way to avoid their unwelcome advances.
Yep. Hey! Very nice streamlined, scaly fish. Interesting, even a pretty little silverfish like that is a flesh eater. Took a little piece of fish.
One thing is clear from fishing these backwaters: there's a solid foundation of prey.
If you've got small fish like that, you would expect normally to have bigger fish feeding on them right the way up the food pyramid to the very large predators.
But the water conditions are making the job harder. I've arrived in Obidos at the peak of the flood season. The river has burst its banks and is spreading far and wide, allowing freshwater predators to disperse into a vast area of rainforest. However, the dock has become a reef of sunken structure in 20 to 30 feet of water, providing extra hiding spaces and ambush opportunities for deep water hunters. If I can fish from the site where the boat went down, I might yet discover a monster. But before I get the chance, some cargo handlers tell me a huge creature recently surfaced nearby.
They said there was a very big caiman here just last year, where about 100 yards from the port, something like that. It came up, somebody tried to lasso it. It went down again, came up again. They said it was a very big animal. They said like 15, 18 foot. I don't think it was as big as that, but it clearly made an impression on them. Eventually, it submerged and it headed off in the direction of the port. It came up again there, and then it disappeared.
If I think of a creature strong enough to tear limbs from the bodies of the living, then top of the list has to be the caiman. If this relative of the alligator can't swallow its prey whole, it swings and twists off manageable chunks, and that might account for the body parts floating on the river. This town has grown a lot since the disaster, and underwater, it's not the same river that it was. So if I'm to find the evidence I need, I may have to cast my net wider. I've heard about a man who has first-hand experience of the violent power of a giant caiman. I'm hoping he can offer an insight into what a caiman could have done on that terrible night. But to find him, I have to venture into what they call the Igapo, the flooded forest.
Right now is right at the height of the flood season. In parts of the Amazon, you're talking about a 50-foot rise in water level. Here, we're pretty much among the tops of the trees, so we're able to take the boat right into places that would otherwise be dry land.
Rising water allows us just enough depth to sail through these temporary creeks and opens up shortcuts to remote locations.
For the creatures that live in the water, what this means is that instead of being confined to the river channels, they are now spreading out into the forest, and their territory is greatly increased.
Right now, giant caimans have free rein, but water that's too high could see us caught in the canopy, and once inside a narrow creek, there's no turning back. At last, the isolated creek where attack survivor Adamor lives. He has to rely on his younger sons for everything, as he can barely walk. To avoid the floodwater, he confines himself to the upper floor. The attack happened 15 years ago, but it left a permanent reminder.
So he's walking along in the water, this shallow water, and he said suddenly, almost out of nowhere, this caiman just launched itself at him. This is the thing, they can be there and you just don't know it.
And the upper jaw made contact with his chest, and then the lower jaw in the stomach. In no time at all, he was covered in mud, he couldn't see anything. He was shouting, he was screaming. And this thing, he says it was shaking him, shaking him. He said he could see its eyes, so he put this thumb in its eye. He thinks because his thumb was in its eye, it let go. From that point on, it didn't bite him again, it just went off a little distance. He said it was just sitting there, just waiting for him to die. He said there were basically, just flaps of skin hanging, and so he had his guts hanging out from his abdomen, and he said the upper region here, you could see bone.
Adamu would have died had not an elder son and a neighbour heard his screams. When they found him, they had to push his mud-covered intestines back into his abdomen before carrying him away. Although he was stitched up at a hospital, his infection raged for months, and it took more than a year for him to get back the feeling in his chest and belly. It's a miracle he survived at all.
The thing about this place, this region, is just because of the nature of it, the people live a very aquatic life. They have no choice but to engage with the water and come into contact with the creatures that live in the water. Now, Adamu survived his encounter with the caiman thanks to a combination of physical toughness, presence of mind, willpower, and it has to be said, quite a big dollop of luck as well. But for most people in that situation, meeting an animal like that, the outcome is going to be very different.
This horrific account shows how easy it would be for a caiman to tear a vulnerable human limb from limb. But did they play a part in the carnage when the boat went down? The disaster happened in the middle of the night and in very deep water. I'm not sure whether caimans attack in those conditions, but there is a way to find out. Caimans have tried to steal my catches at night before, but that was in shallow margins.
Hey, get out of it! I'm going to try and just pull this up on the side. Oh!
Tonight, I'll use a fish to set a trap. I want to hook a fish and let it create a commotion on the surface of deep water to see if it triggers an attack by any caiman out there. It's a risky operation in a small boat, in deep water, in the dark, but it's my only option to find out if caimans should be on my suspect list.
It's taking a line.
I'm in the Amazon, hunting down the perpetrator of lethal attacks on passengers escaping the river's worst boat disaster. Hundreds of people disappeared that night, and there are plenty of potential suspects lurking in these murky waters.
He had his guts hanging out, he was screaming.
I'm trying to discover if black caimans will attack in deep water after dark.
Taking a line.
But the fish I've hooked to bait a caiman is a lot more powerful than I expected.
This is a Piraiba, but it's a small one. It's strange to talk of a fish as small when it puts a bend in the rod like that, but these grow much bigger than this. A couple of 100 pounds and up.
It's good to see my first large predator in these waters, but I need something smaller and much more manageable for my caiman test.
But interesting to see it.
Could Piraiba be contenders for the attacks on the passengers? I know some have the potential to swallow a man whole. But these giants are at the top of the food pyramid and just aren't very numerous. This stage, I don't think they could account for the scale of the carnage. I haven't seen a single eye shine from a caiman. Perhaps my chances of attracting one are very slim in the middle of all this floodwater. I need some more local intelligence if I'm to pursue this line any further. While asking around about any recent caiman sightings, I'm told fishermen recently lassoed a giant. It's now being held as a research facility, which might give me the access I need to test whether caimans could cause so much carnage in one night.
So it was captured in an area where people live, where people get in the water, they wash their clothes and whatever. It's a big animal. It's about 13.5 foot long. It's over 500 pounds in weight. When they got it here, they discovered that it was actually blind in one eye. This is probably why the fisherman was able to lasso it. It's going to stay here for a little while, and then it's going to be released. It's going to be released in a reserve where it's not going to come and bother people on the waterfront.
There's no doubt caimans attack humans, but how would they account for the huge number of missing passengers? Either there was a massive number of caimans at Obidos that night, or each predatory reptile was taking down one passenger after another. To test the multiple victim theory, I'm under the supervision of a reptile vet, and I'm scaling up my line and bait, big time, to trigger a first strike. Now I have its undivided attention.
But I'm just trying to see how motivated it is to hang on to that meal.
I've used pig as bait, as I'm told its flesh tastes very similar to human.
I don't think that's a grip that's very easily broken.
This beast's instinct is to hold on to its prey at all costs. Why would they risk losing a catch by attacking multiple people in a matter of minutes? Time to cut and run and find out about the other theory. In a river as vast as the Amazon, could there have been hundreds of caimans in the area when the boat went down? Anselmo da Fonseca has studied their populations in the wild.
Óbidos é que a área mais estreita do Rio Amazonas.
He said the thing about Obidos is that the river there is, by Amazonian standards, it's narrow, there's a strong current, and this isn't the preferred habitat of caiman.
Mas normalmente as áreas preferenciais são áreas mais calmas.
They prefer calm water, they prefer backwaters,
Eu
lakes.
acho difícil realmente que tenha uma grande ocorrência de jacarés naquele ponto.
So he said it's very unlikely that they would come close to a city, close to people. They don't tolerate caiman.
So at the time of the boat disaster, caiman numbers were very low. This knocks them off the top contender spot. Something else is out there. Just as the Amazon dwarfs the world's other rivers, the scale of its biggest disaster overshadows all my other investigations. With the staggering number of people who were killed, injured, or went missing on one night. One of the boatmen has told me that most of the bodies recovered from the accident were buried in town, but confusion still reigns over the numbers involved. It's usually a matter of family honor to keep the graves of loved ones in good condition. But in the middle of the cemetery, I find a line of graves that are near derelict.
This is where the victims are buried. Some of them identified, but mostly not. There's two reasons for this. Here in the tropics, it was necessary to bury everybody quickly, certainly long before word could be got out to family, who could then arrive at the scene. Also because apparently a lot of the bodies weren't intact. They were burying body parts, and this was pre-DNA testing. So this is why, to this day, nobody knows for sure exactly how many people died.
It's estimated that these mass graves hold as many as 200 bodies. But because they were unidentified, no one knows who's here. And I now suspect that a similar number could have stayed in the water, victim to who knows what. So what exactly did happen? I feel I owe it to the passengers and crew of the Sobral Santos to search for an answer. Just as I'm leaving the cemetery, I meet a mother and daughter visiting one of the few marked graves. Both survived the disaster, but one of their family didn't. The mother agrees to meet with me later by the river to tell me what happened to her the night the Sobral Santos went down.
Bem, nós saímos de Santarém, eu entrei no barco com os meus filhos, 4.
She said that the family was actually moving to Manaus. So she got on the boat with 4 young children between the ages of 7 and 2. To start with, there's lots of space.
Não estava muito lotado o barco.
She says 3 boats normally operated this route, but one was out of service and the other had just broken down. So the Sobral Santos was taking on all the passengers and cargo.
More and more people got on. She said it was getting to the point where it was just ridiculous. There were so many people on, the hammocks so densely packed together, and it actually got to the point where she was wanting to get off. But by that time, in fact, the boat was already in the middle of the river. It had just left without really any notice, so she's on the boat travelling. She said, though, that she wasn't sleeping. She was very worried. So when the boat arrived in Obidos, she was still awake.
At 3:30 in the morning, she heard a crash, shouting, and then scraping metal. Within minutes, her life would be changed forever. While investigating the fate of the Sobral Santos, I uncovered a chilling personal connection to the doomed boat. Find out what it is after this. While investigating the Sobral Santos, I discovered the wreck was salvaged, sold, refurbished and renamed, and I unknowingly sailed 900 miles on this ship of ghosts on my first trip to the Amazon. I'm scouring the mighty Amazon River to uncover the killer that tore into passengers trying to escape from the river's biggest boat disaster. A survivor, Josalina Colares, has bravely agreed to meet me right by the place where the boat went down.
Estava caindo as garrafas de mercadoria que estavam na beirada do barco.
She said the first thing that alerted her to something being wrong was crashing sound made by falling bottles on the upper deck.
Só o pessoal começou a gritar.
She jumped down from her hammock and actually went straight into the water because the boat was already in the process of tipping over. She's under the water and she has some kind of crate that's trapped her foot. She had to rip her foot out, and she said in the process of this it cut, her foot was bleeding. She came to the surface. One of her sons surfaced next to her and hung onto her. That was when she grabbed hold of a bench floating past. At that point, she was actually in the middle of the river.
The boat was gone, and the waters of Obidos were filled with battered and bleeding passengers. It was the perfect storm that put weakened prey right in front of predators.
It was very dark. You could see a certain amount, but she said there was lots of screaming. And then, just gradually, they, one by one, disappeared under the surface.
Ficou aquele silêncio, morreu muita gente, sabe?
It was then just silence. She was bleeding quite heavily from her foot, and people actually said to her, you were lucky you weren't attacked by something in the water.
A boat found them in the darkness and took them to the hospital, where they were treating 2 of her other children. But her 2-year-old son, Rui, was missing. His body was found in the river the next day in the afternoon, so he didn't survive. Although this disaster happened more than 30 years ago now, it's very clear that the memory of it is still very much alive in the minds of many people. I think what I found most chilling from Dioselina's account was her description of how all the people around her screaming on the surface gradually became silent one by one as they disappeared beneath the surface. And the other thing it really brings home to me is how just the magnitude of this incident just far surpasses anything that I've looked into before. Dioselina's tragic testimony is starting to fill in some of the missing pieces of this puzzle. Yet so much still remains a mystery, even though the boat went down right off the edge of the dock. What exactly is in these waters? I'll need to pursue every lead, examine every contender, however tenuous, if I'm to uncover the perpetrator of the horrific carnage. Alongside the Piraiba, the Amazon's other super heavyweight is the Arapaima. I've felt the full weight of one of these, and it left me injured for weeks. But they aren't found in fast-flowing rivers, and their method of attack doesn't fit the victim's injuries. An Arapaima either rams its target or crushes prey against the roof of its mouth. They don't strip flesh or tear limb from limb. What I'm really looking for is a predatory fish that's large enough, but also which is present in significant numbers. One way to see what other heavyweight predators operate in the Amazon is to check out the fish market. The largest one is right in the heart of the rainforest. Fishing boats bring their catches here from hundreds of miles around. To get there, I'm completing the intended journey of the Sobral Santos, almost 350 miles upstream to Manaus.
This is a thing called a kuyu. It's a type of catfish, but it's got armoured plates as well as having them on the head. It's got this row of sort of bony scales down the side. Some people call these ripsaw catfish. It's almost like the teeth of a saw coming down the side. Quite a small mouth.
But strong enough to vacuum up crustaceans and insect larvae from the riverbed. But when the forest is flooded, like now, it prefers seeds and fruit.
And what's interesting is that they've hacked through the fins here. They've hacked through there. Basically, they got pointed spines on there, and if you shove a load of these in a sack and then someone puts them on their head, it's going to hurt. So, this is arowana. They feed on the surface. You often find them right up on the surface of the water. They got this mouth that just opens up. It's a bit like the back of a cargo plane almost. Predatory fish, little teeth around the edge.
Some interesting fish, but not the variety or size I saw last time I was here.
Bem fresca, né? No mercado tem outro peixe grande aqui hoje? No, só isso. Yeah, he's just saying that the only big fish I'm likely to see today are these. And these actually aren't very big as Arapaima go. So these were caught fairly locally. Criado esses?
Criado.
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 This is interesting. These are actually farmed, which is something that's happening increasingly. It's taken the pressure off the wild stock. It's actually forbidden to catch these in the wild, except in certain circumstances. With a bit of luck, they might start coming back in the wild as a result.
I'm not seeing any obvious suspects at the fish market, but I've got another place to check out. a fishing tackle shop that's got an extraordinary display of bizarre catches collected over the decades. These mummified fish might give me an insight into what could have been in the river when the boat went down. Hanging from the ceiling is a rogue's gallery of specimens, but one stands out in size alone, at around 8 foot long.
Well, at first sight this could be a large Piraiba, but looking closer, absolutely not. 5 gill slits, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the teeth give it away. This is a bull shark. This is a bull shark. Where did this come from exactly? Pega onde esse tubarão?
Foi pescado abaixo de Itacoatiara, o município 85, acho, 88, nessa faixa. 85, 88.
Well, the story behind this bull shark is that it was caught about 30 years ago, in the mid-80s, thereabouts, and apparently it weighed something over 200 pounds, came in on a fishing boat, probably on a long line that a fisherman had put out for catfish, but yeah, quite a beast.
Bull sharks are one of the few sharks that can survive in fresh water. They've been found 2,500 miles up the Amazon from the ocean, way past Óbidos and Manaus. One even attacked a woman near here back in the 1980s. So this ferocious predator was around at the time of the Óbidos boat disaster. It's a lead I have to follow up. At the harbour, I hear recent reports of multiple dorsal fins breaking the surface. If these known man-eaters are as numerous as these reports suggest, could bull sharks have played a part in the Amazon apocalypse? I'm travelling the mighty Amazon River to uncover the killer that tore into passengers trying to escape from the river's biggest boat disaster. My latest suspect, the bull shark. I've found a specimen that places this known man-eater in the right place at the right time for the attack. And I found a boatman named Bacurau, who has decades of experience on the river.
Eles acompanham os navios que estão vindo do Alto Atlântico para cá. Quando os navios grandes vêm, devido ao pessoal que vem nos navios, joga comida.
I asked him about bull sharks, and he said that there's a belief that they follow boats up the river.
Fora, eles vêm acompanhando.
People are throwing food and bits and bobs off the back of the boat, and they follow them up.
Vê tubarão aqui. Aqui tem tubarão também.
But are they here in enough numbers for a mass attack?
He says now it's pretty well unheard of, you just don't see them. And even in the old days, they used to be very rare.
A fish so scarce here couldn't be responsible for so much carnage. Another contender falls off my list. But all is not lost. He says there's another large predator in the river. These grow as big as the bull shark in the tackle shop, but are faster and more agile. And there's a lot of these lethal hunters out there.
He says it's actually very common to see 5 or 6 of them together. On occasion, maybe as much as 20 or even more than that. Huge backs breaking the surface.
The alien-looking Amazon river dolphin, the boto. These top predators are here in large numbers and aggressively compete with fishermen on the river. Unlike its marine cousins, the boto is no fun-loving dolphin. Its reputation is a lot darker.
Turns out people are actually wary of these animals. They are well known to knock their canoes and actually tip them out of the canoes into the water.
They're said to be enchanted, but not in a good way. Some even say they can change into human form to lure people to their death in the river. Many people here refuse to get in the water when there are botos around. Often covered in battle scars, they've even been known to attack and kill bull sharks. But it doesn't stop there.
I've been talking to some people around town, and it turns out a few people have been hospitalised by botos, by being rammed by them.
There are all sorts of estimates for calculating the force a boto can deliver, but numbers don't have the same impact as a demonstration.
To get an idea of it, it's something a bit like this.
Being hit by a boto is like being in a car when it hits a brick wall at 30 miles an hour. So I'm left with the question, is the river's largest predatory mammal a serial killer? I've been told there's a place nearby where wild botos are known to congregate around a desolate house that succumbed to the rising floodwaters. I got close to botos once before. They were big, not at all afraid of me, and they made me very uneasy.
They really definitely have a dark side.
That was 5 years ago, but back then I didn't know half of what I know now. The only way I'll find out whether they could have gone after the boat victims is to see whether they'll go after me. In the heart of the Amazon, I'm on the hunt for the perpetrator of an apocalyptic attack on the survivors of the river's worst ever shipping disaster. Could it be one of the Amazon's top freshwater predators, the otherworldly Boto river dolphin?
Question now is, how are they going to react to me?
Is there anything behind the legend that they lure people to their deaths in the river? There's only one way to find out. These animals can attack in two ways, with dozens of sharp teeth or a headbutt that can take out a shark. And I've got no idea how many of them know that I'm here.
These things, they seem to just appear from nowhere.
I think I'm under surveillance by a group of 6 or 7 predators. I'm very wary of the unpredictable nature of wild animals, especially ones that aren't afraid of me.
You get this sense that they're definitely checking you out. They're checking me out, and I have to submit to it. But they're trying to see if I am, well, maybe food, but also they want to see if I'm a threat. And I think if they see me as a threat, that is bad news for me. There's no way I can swim away from them quicker than they can swim. There's no way I can resist them either. These are solid. They're big, they're solid. I get the feeling it's very much on their terms.
And I'm very much out of place when I'm in their murky world. Their hyper-flexible necks and rotating flippers enable them to pursue prey amongst the submerged tree trunks of the flooded forest. Their ability to communicate with each other lets them coordinate attacks on prey. And echolocation means they can home in on objects as small as a pin in murky water, even at night. They would have no problem negotiating a boat full of passengers as it sank beneath the surface.
So what happened on that night when the boat went down? Were dolphins in any way involved in the carnage that people describe? Well, first of all,
were they there? Were they at the scene? And I've no doubt that they would have been. At that time in particular, the dolphins were very numerous in the river. They would have been aware that something was happening.
And there's no doubt these formidable hunters are armed and dangerous. But when it comes to humans, the Boto has one weakness. Its jaw muscles. The Boto's tooth-lined beak is perfect for seizing and gripping slippery fish, but it doesn't have the crushing vice-like power of the caiman. They can deliver a crippling headbutt against people who provoke them, but they can't rip limb from limb. Their probing curiosity makes me feel uneasy, but I've seen no unprovoked aggression. And although that curiosity could have drawn them right into the middle of the chaos on the night of the accident,
I don't think they were responsible for any of the carnage that the witnesses describe.
but something in this water was. I've now investigated all the obvious suspects, the Amazon predators large enough to take out humans and that have been known to do so, but none of them can account for the scale of this massacre. So I'm wondering whether it's the number rather than the size of perpetrators that's the key to what happened in the waters at Abydos. Perhaps the sheer quantity of killers accounts for the carnage. If there's one group of people who'll know which fish are most numerous here, it's the town's fishermen.
Sobre o barco, o accidente com o barco aqui. Although it was a long time ago, they still remember the incident, and what they remember in particular, that it was a hard time for fishermen because there was a ban imposed on fishing for a number of weeks afterwards, and the reason for that was people were starting to catch fish with human remains inside.
Everything had either attacked or scavenged the bodies in the river. Eventually, fishing resumed. But fishermen tell me they no longer catch the size of fish they once caught here. They say that the fish processing plant used to attract very large fish, but it doesn't anymore because they now dispose of the carcasses elsewhere.
This factory was actually here at the time, and one interesting difference though is that today the skeletons, the remains that aren't eaten by people, they're sent away to make animal feed. Back then, everything was put in the river, just right here, a matter of yards. And it was chumming this eddy you've got here, and that inevitably would have created a concentration of fish here way in excess of what you've got today.
The waste from this fish processing plant turned Abydos into a massive artificial feeding station, which likely attracted big predators from miles around to feed in the deep circulating waters off these docks. It had to be the worst place on the Amazon for a boat full of people to go down. I need to find out what's in the water around the docks, and I'm given special dispensation to fish for one day. Between dry season and flood, the water level here rises more than 20 feet, concealing staircases and gangways beneath the surface.
There's a lot of structure, so fish like this kind of place.
It gives them plenty of opportunities for cover, and the cargo handlers seem to think the same.
They actually put lines down themselves. There's one over there. It's going to be a bit snaggy though, but I'm going to put a bait down and see what turns up.
But before I get the chance, there's a take on one of the lines.
Como se chama essa aqui? Baku, eh? Right, this is before I'm even started. It's an armour-plated catfish. And that's quite a meaty fish. That's a very promising start.
If a fish this size is lurking right under the dock, I can't imagine what else might be hiding in these waters. But straight away, I get a gruesome reply from the other side of the dock. As soon as the man started gutting and cleaning his catch in the water, hordes of flesh-eaters boldly rose from the depths to feast on the kill.
So these are kangaroo.
Not the tiny variety that swims up inside people, but the kangaroo asu, the ones that usually bore into dead flesh. I've investigated this fish before. What looked like bullet holes in a man's body were bore holes from this fish. They were eating his body from the inside out.
So this is what happens when you've got smell in the water. This water here is murky, it's not clear, and yet these fish, in probably about 20 foot of water, can just find that in no time at all, just purely from the chemicals that are being released into the water, the blood and fragments of meat.
That speed of response surprises me. I thought these creatures sought out soft, decomposing bodies to tear into, but this fish was alive just minutes ago.
This is a really horrible fish to handle. It's very, very muscular and wriggly. There's almost no eyes at all on this. They don't find their way about by sight, it's purely by smell. And what they do is they cut a circular lump out.
If these creatures respond so quickly to fresh blood in the water, what would they have made of hundreds of passengers battered by untethered cargo and bleeding into the Amazon as they tried to swim to shore? And what else is down there that might be responding to the same signals? I don't have much time here, but I think it's worth a change of plan. I want to see what responds not to fish blood and flesh, but mammal. It's time to set a trap.
So that's 3 bags of entrails, fairly bloody but quite fatty. That's going to give off quite a bit of odour. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to stick it down the water here and see if anything comes along. Leave that there, see what happens.
To make the most of my time, I'm also deploying rod and line to seek out more stealthy predators from the depths. With nothing biting, I take a minute to check the trap.
Well, there we go. That's quite a disgusting haul.
My bloody, meaty bait has not disappointed me. And the Candirua Sioux are not alone. There's another flesh-eater in there with them, a fish known as the water vulture, or piracachinga.
It's a catfish, no scales, quite small eyes, but what it has got, it's got these very long tentacles, which gives some kind of clue as to how it finds its way around, finds its food down there in the murky water. It might be small, but these are present in very large numbers, much more numerous than piranhas, for example.
I've been told the wreck was full of these gruesome flesh-eaters when it was raised from the depths, and they were still feeding on the bodies.
The teeth are very small, but it's actually got a very strong bite for a fish this size, so it can easily tear off lumps of flesh. Although they normally feed on dead creatures, in a situation where there's maybe lots of bodies in the water, some of them might be alive but actually injured. I don't know if these are going to think twice necessarily before they actually get into a wound and start feeding.
But however large the horde and horrific the attack, I'm not sure that even thousands of these little mouths operating alone could be responsible for so many people disappearing so quickly. Could there have been another player that tipped the balance? Before I can return to my line, I'm approached by a dock supervisor, João Pamos, who tells me about a recent attack on some men who went swimming in the river.
Aí de repente, deles, dos 4, começou a afundar.
There were 4 of them, and one of them suddenly got into difficulties.
Começou a afundar, soltou.
He was shouting. calling for help.
De apoio à sua embarcação.
There was somebody in a boat nearby, and he managed to get across to him and hang on to him. And there was something holding onto his leg. And the guy in the boat was pulling, and he actually saw a fish that had swallowed the person's foot, almost up to the knee. The fish eventually let go.
Não chegou a morrer, mas a perna dele ficou toda.
But apparently the man's leg was a bit of a mess. He actually managed to see this fish closely enough to recognize it, and it's a large catfish with a big mouth,
E estava puxando ele.
and it was dragging this guy under the water.
I've encountered the 3 biggest catfish in the Amazon before. The Piraiba, the Xiaowu, and the redtail. I've already discounted the Piraiba because they're such solitary predators. But could a concentration of another big catfish have wreaked the carnage at the docks? Primed with this new information and the vision of a large meat-eating catfish on the end of my line, I lower a fresh bait deep into the submerged structure. I just have to hope I can catch one before my 24 hours at the docks are up.
In other situations, I could put the rod down and just listen for a click of the reel. But here, oh, this is something going.
I'm scouring the depths of the Amazon for a horde of large catfish that may have been tearing into the survivors of a boat disaster. In the docks where it all happened, I've got a very strong fish on the end of my line.
Oh, this is something going. Oh! Right, I think the hook came out. What I was going to say was that I can't afford to let anything have even a few inches, because it's going to wrap me around something. I could have, hindsight now, I'm thinking I should have let that fish have a little more line, but I don't know. You do that here and it's just wrapped you around some of the structure. That felt like quite a good fish.
The only way I'll uncover its identity is to get a fresh bait straight back down there. But the countless underwater snags are consuming my gear.
This place is basically eating terminal tackle. It's just eating its way through my tackle box. I'm just losing so much gear.
Fishing at the attack site has concealed more than it's revealed.
And that's just one of the hazards of fishing a place like this. There's just so much stuff on the bottom.
My 24 hours at the docks are up, and I don't have anything to show for it, except for the information about the catfish attack. If Xiaowu or redtails are contenders, surely someone in the town would know about them. I tracked down a man who was head of the cargo handlers in the early 80s and who remembers what was living in the water back then.
Back at the time when the accident happened, there were a lot more fish in the river and also bigger fish as well. What's happened since then, the reason the numbers have decreased and also the sizes of fish, is because there's been a lot more fishing activity. And also people these days eat catfish. In the old days they didn't.
It was thought to be unlucky or even dangerous to eat catfish, so these predators thrived.
Back then, because of the large fish, people were afraid to bathe in the river. There are stories of women going there with their children, children disappearing, people putting this down to fish in the water.
They were in no doubt that catfish were to blame.
And even today, that fear persists, what might be in the deep water, and you don't see very many people bathing by the riverside there.
So I have new contenders in my sights, but there's no way I can investigate these heavyweight catfish here and now in Óbidos.
A lot has happened in 30 years. Here on the main river, people eat all manner of catfish.
That, and the increase in commercial fishing generally, means I simply won't find the evidence I need here now. Instead, I need to find some corner of the Amazon that's in the same state now that the main river was in then.
So what I really need to do is to travel to a more remote part of the river system, relatively untouched by progress, where the fish might be present in the size and numbers that they once were here. And from that, I might get some insight into what part they played on that night.
But that's not going to be easy. To outrun the huge reach of thousands of commercial fishing boats, I have to literally go beyond the limits. I'm told I must travel more than 750 miles upstream, to the mouth of a little-known tributary called the Padawiri, which snakes its way north towards the border with Venezuela. This river's waters flow down past Óbidos, but at this extreme distance, they're rarely fished. For me, this will be completely uncharted territory. I've examined all the other serious contenders and eliminated them one by one. I'm staking everything on the chance that out here, I'll find the heavyweight catfish I'm after, and that I'll be able to prove it fits the profile of the super assassin that wiped out so many passengers so quickly on just one night. I'll need to deploy tackle that can deal with their extraordinary pulling power. That means a line with 150 pounds breaking strain, tough fluorocarbon to cope with submerged trees and rocks, and a steel leader that can withstand piranha teeth. And to top it all, a serious hook.
This is a pattern I've actually used for shark fishing in the past. This is what's known as a circle hook. That point actually points towards the shank. It forms a rough circle. You actually fish in a slightly different way. You just engage the reel, let the line tighten. It's only when it reaches the lip you have proper contact. So most of the fish are hooked very nicely in the lip, where it's quite easy to get the hook out.
Which is just as well when the creature I'm after stands accused of engulfing human limbs.
That's piranha.
It's history repeating itself. Once again, piranhas are stripping my bait, but these bites feel unusually aggressive.
These piranhas have the feel of quite big piranhas. A couple of times they've taken out a couple of foot of line.
I could move on, but my instinct tells me I should get a closer look at one of these bait thieves.
My circle hook isn't going to catch them. Even a big piranha won't get that entirely in. I'm going to change for a J hook. And what that means is that next time they start bothering the bait, I'm going to strike. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Yeah. Feels sizable.
I'm heading up a remote tributary of the Amazon, on the hunt for heavyweight catfish that I suspect had the pulling power to drag struggling survivors escaping from a boat disaster to the river's depths. But my attempts are being thwarted by an aggressive predator hiding in the river's dark waters.
Yeah.
The strike feels like a piranha, but 10 times the size of the ones I've caught downstream.
Right, that's what's been eating my bait. That's a really big black piranha. Just the size of that head. Power of those jaws. Now, a piranha this size could do some serious damage.
It dwarfs the red bellies I've caught before. So could a swarm of these beasts be to blame?
Luckily, they're not normally found in the concentrations that you find the small red-belly piranhas. And the other thing is, actually, these are very rare in the main river, so I'm pretty certain that it wasn't involved in the events of that night. It's 17 long and then 19-inch girth.
And at more than 6.5 pounds, this is the largest piranha I've ever caught.
If my finger had been the way there, I'd be minus a finger.
If piranhas this size are at the smaller end of the food chain here, I'm seriously wondering what's at the other end of it. I'll have to keep fishing to find out what tipped the balance of survival against the passengers of the Sobral Santos. For days I followed the relentless coils of this serpentine river northwards towards the remote border with Venezuela.
I might see the fish in a second.
Finally, a flash of fin at the surface shows I'm dead on target.
This is the pirarara.
More commonly known as the Amazon red-tailed catfish. Its Guarani name comes from the word for fish, pir, and the word for parrot, arara, because the fish's fins look like the plumage of the scarlet macaw.
Out the water they grunt, but also they make this squeaking noise. It's a piece of bone clicking against another piece of bone. And I can only imagine that that is actually for communication underwater. Normally these things live in pretty low vis conditions, hence the feelers, but this gives them another channel of communication to operate on.
Next to its colour, the red-tail's most striking feature is its enormous head, around 1/3 of its total body length.
Wide mouth, very capacious mouth cavity, lots of little teeth that form these sort of sandpapery pads. So one here, one in the lower jaw. It's very good for gripping prey, anything they get hold of. As you can see my finger, it's sort of rasps my finger there.
But I still have too many unanswered questions to condemn the red-tail just yet. If these predators were involved, exactly what role did they play? I know they can grow to a size where they could easily engulf half a human leg, and I felt more than enough power to pull someone under. But how could these expert grippers account for all the mutilated bodies and so many passengers disappearing in the middle of the night? Up until now, I haven't dared fish here after dark. My location is so remote that if anything ever happened, an emergency evacuation at night would be impossible. But despite the risk of capsizing into water home to caimans and other nocturnal predators, I have to find out.
Something bumping on there. It's woken up all of a sudden.
There's the proof that Pirarara are active at night. The fact that they've got those feelers means they can operate and feed with no trouble at all. And quite a decent size as well.
This one is 4 pounds heavier than the last. The case against this particular suspect is building, but if red-tails did pull passengers from the surface that night, what is it about the way they operate that wiped out so many people so quickly, so near the shore? The only way to find out is to keep fishing, to see if there's anything in their behaviour that could reveal an answer to this mystery.
Yep.
I haul in one redtail after another.
Oh!
But in order to bring the fish in, I have to take them on in an underwater battleground, booby-trapped with snags, that's repeatedly destroying my gear.
Look at that, it's just cut on some sharp bit of wood down there.
As the fish come in, I'm building up a picture of what's going on under the water.
And it seems that they very much like proximity to snags. Well, not just proximity, they like being right in these fallen trees. I could feel it grating on a branch down there. So that's basically cut on a branch.
But fishing these nightmarish snags has revealed the answer I'm after. Whenever a redtail takes the bait, it makes a dash for cover right into the heart of the snags.
I've had a couple of runs which, just as I've been getting ready to tighten, it stopped. And it looks like a fish that's maybe picked up the bait and dropped it. And this says something about the catfish behaviour, which is grabbing food and then running off with it.
When I go to reel in, I find it hasn't let go. It's just gone to ground.
It's a bit like a dog running for its basket with a bone.
But in certain circumstances, this behaviour can have lethal consequences.
Catfish clamped on something, swimming, if it is somebody's foot with toes on, wiggling around, and the fish grabs hold of it, it's going to drag the whole thing with it. The entire person is going to come with the catfish. Okay, it might eventually let go. But in that time, that could make the difference between staying above the surface and drowning.
And once the victim's under the water, the Amazon's sharp-toothed predators and scavengers can move in to finish the job. To be sure of my theory, I need to bring up a beast that's clearly capable of engulfing a limb. I have to attempt one more catch with what's left of my tackle. I might be about to get more than I bargained for.
Oh yeah. It's a good sized fish.
In a river full of monsters, I think I'm closing in on the unlikely catalyst that turned a tragic shipwreck into an apocalyptic bloodbath.
Oh yeah. It's a good sized fish. Just keep well clear of the line.
The beast isn't a heavyweight redtail, but a 100-pound plus Piraiba. This goes to show that these pristine waters aren't patrolled by just one type of giant predatory catfish, but two, and both were found at Óbidos. But there's a problem. The hook has been taken deep inside the mouth, and I need to take it out.
I'm going to shove my hand in to get the hook out. It's going to give me a bite. It's bitten my arm.
But this extreme opportunity to feel the bite of a big catfish gives me the last piece of evidence I need. Piraiba are in the same family as redtails, and they have virtually identical rasping pads in their mouths. These give them a grip that prevents slippery, struggling prey from escaping. A grip far superior to human hands. And a grip that I now know would have no problem holding struggling prey in the dark waters of Obidos the night the boat went down.
30 years ago at Obidos, they used to chum the water with remains from the fish processing plant.
I believe these exceptional conditions could have attracted the usually solitary Piraiba in greater numbers than normal. And they were far from alone. There were also hordes of oversized redtails.
And these were fish used to grabbing morsels in the water. A bloody foot or somebody's arm, quite conceivable, they'd grab that, thinking it's an edible morsel. And if you think how little it takes to make the difference between keeping your head above water and going under, it's very little. A fish the size of that, or even half the size of that, gets a good grip on part of you and decides to go. You're not going to have much chance.
My gamble to pursue my quest to this remote tributary has paid off. I now have little doubt that the Amazon's heavyweight catfish played a pivotal role in the disaster, and what they started was finished by their deadly accomplices. Back at Obidos, the final pieces of the puzzle fall into place.
So are we any closer to understanding what happened to those passengers who were unaccounted for at the time, the ones who went below the surface and never reappeared?
And what was responsible for all the body parts floating in the river the next day? No single element causes a disaster of this scale. This catastrophe arose from an extraordinary convergence of conditions and participants on one horrific night. The mix might have included a few rare giants that could have easily torn victims limb from limb, and certainly a multitude of creatures at the other end of the size scale capable of mass carnage.
There is no doubt that there were very large numbers of small carnivores.
Flesh eaters drawn in by the thousands, by the scent of bleeding passengers, and primed to tear into and dismember the bodies of both living and dead. And come daylight, scavenging piranhas would have moved in to clean up what was left. From what I've seen, I think the devastation of this feeding frenzy was only made possible because something first pulled the victims under. Large redtails, aided and abetted by Piraiba. Both have the grip, the power, and the instinct to bolt. And 30 years ago, the pitch-black waters of Obidos were alive with them, perhaps supersized on fish waste, dumped in the river right here, where the Sobral Santos went down. It was the perfect storm that delivered weakened prey to hordes of hungry flesh eaters.
And if 30 years ago you were in a boat travelling up the Amazon, home to some of the world's most notorious river monsters, the last place you would want it to sink would be here.
To watch more video of the most terrifying monsters and see behind the scenes, go to animalplanet.com/rivermonsters.